Archaeologists just found 8 hidden rooms inside a pyramid we thought was fully mapped. A 19th century explorer stood in a blocked, rubble-choked passage inside an Egyptian pyramid, ran his hand along the stone, and wrote down a guess. He thought there might be more rooms beyond the rubble. He couldn't prove it. He couldn't even get through it. And then he died, and the guess sat in an old survey report for 187 years, ignored by almost everyone who came after him, until a restoration crew working with modern laser scanners walked into the same passage, in the same pyramid, and found out he was right the entire time. This is the story of how a routine conservation project turned into one of the most important architectural discoveries at Abu Sir in decades, and how it happened not because anyone was hunting for treasure, but because a team of engineers and Egyptologists were simply trying to stop a 4,500-year-old building from falling apart. To understand why this discovery matters, you first have to understand how easy it is to walk right past Abu Sir without knowing it's there. Most people who fly to Egypt go to Giza, with its 3 enormous pyramids, and its crowds, and its camels, and its postcards. Some go to Saqqara, home of the famous Step Pyramid. Almost nobody detours to Abu Sir, a scattering of smaller, more weathered pyramids a few miles south of Giza that most tourists never even hear mentioned. But in the 5th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, roughly 4,500 years ago, Abu Sir was exactly where a king wanted to be buried. And the king who started that tradition, the first pharaoh to choose Abu Sir over the older royal cemeteries, was named Sahur. Sahur was the second ruler of the 5th dynasty, reigning for a little over a decade sometime around 2458 to 2446 BCE. Under his rule, Egypt sent trading expeditions abroad, developed its navy, and produced some of the finest relief carving to survive from the entire Old Kingdom. His pyramid at Abu Sir is not the largest pyramid ever built. Nowhere close. It's smaller than the giants at Giza, and today it's badly eroded, a collapsed mound of rubble and broken casing stone that a casual visitor might mistake for a hill of debris. But the temple and causeway attached to it once held more than 100,000 square feet of finely carved relief. By some estimates, more than 3 times the surface area of decorated wall found in the Great Pyramid of Giza. If Abu Sir is the forgotten pyramid field, Sahur's monument is its quiet masterpiece, which is exactly why everyone assumed it had already given up its secrets. Sahur's pyramid has been studied since the 1800s, and the man whose work became the standard reference for its interior was a German architect and Egyptologist named Ludwig Borchardt, who conducted an exhaustive survey in the early 1900s and published his findings in 1907. For more than a century, Borchardt's plans were treated as close to gospel. He was thorough, careful, and working at the very edge of what early 20th century archaeology could achieve. He documented the descending passages, the antechamber, the burial chamber, and where the walls were too badly wrecked by ancient stone robbers to say anything more, he documented that too. Nobody seriously expected fresh surprises. The pyramid was mapped. It was filed under solved. But almost a century before Borchardt even arrived, a different explorer had already left a strange loose thread that nobody had properly followed up. In 1836, a British Egyptologist named John Shea Paring was excavating inside Sahur's pyramid when he noticed something odd in the northeastern corner of the antechamber's eastern wall. A low, narrow passage, choked completely with rubble and debris. Paring guessed the passage might lead somewhere. Probably, he thought, to storage rooms for the king's burial goods. But the passage was too dangerous and too clogged to force open with the tools of his era. So he noted his suspicion, moved on, and the passage sat forgotten. When Borchardt surveyed the pyramid decades later, he didn't pursue Paring's lead either. The eastern wall of the antechamber was so severely damaged by ancient looters. Only a small corner and about a foot of the original wall still survived, that there was simply nothing solid left to interpret. Paring's note became a footnote to a footnote, cited occasionally, acted on by no one. That changed in 2019 when a joint Egyptian-German mission, led by Egyptologist Dr. Mohammed Ismail Khaled of the University of Würzburg, began a long-term conservation project inside Sahur's pyramid. Like so many real discoveries in archaeology, this one did not start with anyone looking for hidden rooms. It started with a much less glamorous problem. The interior of the pyramid was falling apart. Centuries of stress, water infiltration, and structural decay had left the substructure fragile and, in places, genuinely dangerous to enter. The mission's goal, backed by the Antiquities Endowment Fund of the American Research Center in Egypt, was to stabilize the interior, clean out centuries of accumulated debris, replace collapsing retaining walls, and make the burial chambers safe enough to study and eventually open to researchers. It was conservation work, not treasure hunting. Nobody wrote hidden storerooms into the original project proposal. But to conserve a structure properly, you first have to understand exactly what you're conserving. Where the original walls stood, where the voids are, where a seemingly solid surface might actually be hiding a collapsed space behind it. So as the team worked through the antechamber, clearing centuries of rubble and using advanced 3D laser scanning, a portable LiDAR system that could build a precise digital model of even the narrowest, most damaged corridors, they began to reconstruct the original dimensions of rooms that had been so badly wrecked by ancient robbers that no one had been able to map them accurately before. And it was during this careful, technical, unglamorous process that the team's own excavation crossed paths with Perring's old prediction. In the northeastern corner of the antechamber, precisely where Perring had described his block passage nearly 2 centuries earlier, the team found traces of that same low passageway. This time, they were able to actually clear it. What they found on the other side was not a single hidden room. It was 8 of them. The team uncovered a series of previously undocumented storage chambers, known in Egyptological terms as magazines. Rooms built specifically to house the king's funerary equipment, the objects and provisions meant to accompany him into the afterlife. Both the number and the scale of these storage rooms surprised the researchers. Sahur's magazines were both larger and more numerous than those found in the pyramids of the kings who came immediately before him. According to Dr. Khaled, that expansion suggests something meaningful about Sahur's reign itself, that his funerary equipment required significantly more storage space than earlier royal burials, hinting at the wealth and scale of what was placed inside his pyramid at the time of his death. There's also a detail here that separates Sahur from many of his fellow pharaohs in a very specific way. Because his pyramid complex was apparently completed and fully stocked within his own lifetime, Sahur may be the only king of the entire Old Kingdom period known to have lived to see his own funerary equipment actually placed inside his pyramid. Most rulers died before their monuments, and the goods meant to fill them were fully finished. The condition of the newly found chambers tells its own story about the centuries that followed Sahur's burial. The northern and southern sections of the storage area were badly damaged, worn down by millennia of decay, water intrusion, and the same structural stress that had made the whole conservation project necessary in the first place. But even in that damaged state, the team could still make out the remnants of the original walls and sections of the ancient floor, enough to reconstruct, with real confidence for the first time, how this part of the pyramid's interior had actually been laid out. Where earlier generations of Egyptologists had only rubble, damage, and an old, unverified guess to work with, the 2023 team had something closer to a floor plan. What makes this discovery genuinely significant isn't just the number of rooms. It's what those rooms do to our understanding of Sahur's place in pyramid history. Egyptologists have long treated Sahur's reign as a turning point, a moment when pyramid construction shifted away from the sheer, overwhelming mass of the 4th dynasty giants at Giza towards smaller pyramids paired with much more elaborate, more heavily decorated temple complexes. The newly mapped storage chambers add real weight to that shift. They suggest a king who was investing not in scale for its own sake, but in the volume and richness of what filled his tomb. A pyramid that was, by design, smaller on the outside and considerably more layered and complex within. Mostafa Waziri, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities, described the find as reshaping how scholars understand the interior design and architecture of Sahur's pyramid specifically, and by extension, how they understand the broader architectural experimentation happening across the early 5th dynasty. There's something worth sitting with in how this discovery actually happened, because it cuts against the popular image of archaeology as a hunt for lost treasure. Nobody found these 8 rooms by getting lucky with a metal detector or stumbling into an unmarked shaft. They found them because a trained restoration team was doing patient, unglamorous structural work, clearing debris, stabilizing walls, scanning surfaces millimeter by millimeter. And because in the middle of that work, they took an old, dismissed observation from 1836 seriously enough to follow it all the way through. Perrin guessed right about a room he never lived to see opened. Borchardt, working with the best tools of 1907, correctly reported that the wall in front of him was too destroyed to interpret. He wasn't wrong. He simply didn't have the technology to see past the damage. It took a century of remeasuring the same 3 feet of stone and eventually a laser scanner precise enough to model a corridor too fragile to walk through safely before anyone could finally confirm what was actually back there. That's really the heart of why this story is worth telling. Sahor's pyramid had been surveyed, mapped, and written up as understood for well over 100 years. Generations of students learned its layout from Borchardt's 1907 plans and had little reason to question them. Not because those plans were bad, but because questioning settled work isn't how most careers get built. And yet the pyramid still had 8 rooms in it that nobody alive had ever properly seen, sitting exactly where 19th century explorer said they might be, waiting for the right combination of patience, restoration funding, and modern scanning technology to finally confirm it. The storage chambers are still being studied. Once the restoration and stabilization work is complete, Dr. Khaled's team plans to open them fully to other researchers, and there's every reason to think more detail about what these rooms once held and how they were originally used will keep emerging as that work continues. It's also worth being honest about what wasn't found here, because it says something about how real archaeological news travels versus how it gets exaggerated once it leaves the hands of the people who actually did the work. There was no sealed, painted chamber, no mysterious ritual scene that broke the rules of Old Kingdom art, no pigment analysis turning up an unexplained binder. Those details make for a punchier headline, but they aren't part of the verified record, and dressing up a genuinely interesting discovery with invented mystery does the real story a disservice. The true version doesn't need the embellishment. A blocked passage, ignored for 187 years, that turned out to hide 8 rooms that reshape how we understand Pharaoh's burial. That's a strong enough story on its own. So here's what I'd actually leave you with. Sahor's pyramid sat right next to some of the most heavily visited monuments on the planet, and it still took 2 centuries, 3 separate expeditions, and a piece of technology nobody in 1836 could have imagined to finally confirm what one overlooked note had been suggesting the entire time. Abusir has other pyramids nearby that have barely been studied with modern tools at all. If 8 rooms could hide behind 3 feet of ruined wall for that long, inside a monument that generations of scholars considered fully mapped, it raises an obvious question. How much of what we think we already know about these sites is really just the best guess of the last team that had the tools to look? What do you think is still sitting unrecorded in the pyramids we assume have already told us everything they have to tell? Let me know in the comments and subscribe, because there's a lot of Egypt still left to scan.